The lawyer's office was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Rafael impatiently flipped through the papers while Clara, sitting beside him, stared at the will with tear-filled eyes. It was the first time they had been together since their father's funeral, yet the chasm between them felt larger than ever. The lawyer cleared his throat before speaking. According to your father's wishes, the family house will be divided equally between the two of you. Rafael sighed audibly, shutting the folder with a sharp motion. Perfect. One more thing to deal with. Clara looked at him, incredulous. Aren't you even a little surprised? I thought this would mean something to you. Clara, it's an old house. Of course it means something. A lot of work and another reason for us to fight, Rafael replied coldly. The lawyer tried to intervene. Mr. Rafael, I can help you resolve this in a way. Don't worry, Rafael interrupted, standing up. Clara can have the house. I just want my share of the money. Sell it or buy me out. I don't care. Clara, now with tears in her eyes, also stood. You have no heart, Rafael. That house is more than bricks and cement. It's where we grew up, where Dad kept everything that mattered to him. And all you want is to get rid of it. Rafael let out a bitter laugh. Grew up? You grew up in a world of dreams. I grew up trying to carry Dad's expectations, while you did whatever you wanted without thinking of the consequences. If the house means so much to you, keep it. But I won't tie myself to that burden. Clara returned to the family house after the meeting, unable to shake off her brother's words. As she walked through the rooms, she felt the weight of the past in every corner. In the living room, she saw the old pendulum clock her father used to wind every evening at 6. In the bedroom, she found a photo album. There was a picture of her and Rafael as children, playing in the backyard. In the photo, both were smiling, as if nothing could ever tear them apart. Clara held the picture, a mix of nostalgia and pain washing over her. Where had it all gone wrong? The next morning, Clara tried to call Rafael, but he didn't answer. Determined to confront him, she went to his apartment and found him packing his bags. You're leaving? She asked, confused. I have work to take care of, he replied, not looking at her. Rafael, this is serious. The house. Dad. Rafael stopped packing and finally looked at her. Clara, enough. Don't you get it? I don't want to be tied to this. Dad always had a fixed idea of what mattered. But to me, the house just represents everything I could never be for him. You think I didn't feel the weight of that too? Clara shot back, indignant. He expected a lot from me as well. Not the same way, Rafael replied, his voice cutting through the air. You were always the favorite. The creative one, the sensitive one, the daughter he loved showing off to his friends. I was the one who had to deliver results. And even then, I was never enough. Clara's heart ached. That's not true, Rafael. Dad loved you. He just had a different way of showing it. Well, if he did, he never made it clear, Rafael said, turning back to his bags. Later that day, Clara returned to the house. She needed to process their conversation and decide what to do. Walking through the halls, she stopped at the studio where her father used to spend hours fixing things and scribbling in notebooks. It was a space Rafael never visited. She found a notebook with rushed handwriting and opened it, hoping to find some insight into her father's thoughts. One page stopped her cold. I hope Rafael understands one day that he was always my strength, even when I couldn't say it in words. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Their father had truly loved Rafael but never knew how to express it. The next day, Clara tried calling Rafael again, but he didn't answer. Frustrated, she sent him a message. Rafael, we need to talk. I found something in the house I think you should see. Please call me. Hours later, Rafael replied with his usual coldness. I'm not interested in whatever you found, Clara. Just resolve this and tell me how much I'm getting. Clara's heart sank. How could he be so distant? Back at the house, Clara sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at the photo of her and Rafael again. Today I realize that the distance between us isn't just about the house or the will. It's about everything we never said to each other. He thinks he was never loved, and I think I was never seen. How can we fix this without destroying what little we have left?" She knew she needed help. This wasn't just about saving the house, it was about saving her bond with her brother. Rafael had not responded to Clara's messages. To him, the house was just another unpleasant task, something to be settled as quickly as possible. To Clara, however, the house was far more than a property. It was a symbol of everything she and Rafael had lost over the years. Their bond as siblings, the closeness of their childhood, and even their father's love, which now felt like a ghost between them. Determined to make Rafael see the value of the house, Clara decided to try a different approach. Rafael was sitting in a cafe, reviewing a work report, when Clara appeared unexpectedly. He looked up at his sister, exasperation evident on his face. "You never know when to quit, do you?" he said as she sat down across from him. "Rafael, just listen to me this time," Clara said, trying to keep calm. "This isn't about money. It's about us. About what we've lost." Rafael shut his laptop, crossing his arms. "You always think you know what's best, Clara. Like you have the magical solution to everything." "I don't," Clara admitted. "But I want to understand. Why are you in such a hurry to get rid of it? Is it because the house reminds you of Dad?" Rafael laughed, but the sound was bitter. "The house reminds me of everything that was never said. And honestly, Clara, I'd rather forget." Clara heard the pain behind his words, but she knew she couldn't force him to see things her way. "Forgetting doesn't fix anything, Rafael. It just makes the wounds deeper." "Then leave my wounds alone," Rafael shot back, grabbing his laptop and walking out before she could say another word. That night, Clara was at the family house, organizing some boxes when she heard footsteps. Turning, she saw Rafael standing at the door, his face tense. "I just came to grab something," he said, pointing to a drawer in their father's office. Clara approached slowly. "Rafael, if you're here, why don't you help me with this? Why can't we do this together?" He shook his head, opening the drawer and pulling out an envelope. "Because every time I walk into this house, it's like I'm trapped in everything that was left unsaid. And I don't know how to deal with that, Clara." She stepped closer, trying to reach out to her brother. "I feel the same way. But we can face it together if you let me." Rafael looked at her, his eyes a mix of anger and sadness. "You don't get it, Clara. You never understood what it was like to be the kid who had to prove something. And now it's too late to change that." He left, leaving Clara alone once again. Desperate, Clara called Anna. "He won't listen, Anna. It's like for him everything is settled. But I know it isn't. I feel like if we keep going this way, we'll lose each other completely." Anna listened carefully before suggesting something different. "Clara, sometimes a person's resistance comes from a place of pain they can't access on their own. Maybe it's time to invite Rafael to see that, but in a way that feels safe for him. Do you think he would accept doing a family constellation?" Clara asked hesitantly. "That depends on how you present the idea," Anna replied. "If you can show him that the goal isn't to judge or fix everything at once, he might see it as an opportunity." Clara agreed, knowing that convincing Rafael would be her biggest challenge yet. 2 days later, Clara found Rafael in his office. He looked exhausted but agreed to see her after much insistence. "What is it now, Clara?" he asked, clearly impatient. "I just want to ask you one thing," she began, holding the envelope with the details of the constellation session. "I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. It's about us, Rafael. About what happened with our family. I think we need this." Rafael sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "Clara, I told you I don't have time for this. And honestly, I don't think it's going to change anything." "Please," Clara said, tears brimming in her eyes. "If not for me, do it for Dad. He wanted us to stay close, Rafael. He wanted us to be a family, even after he was gone." Rafael stared at her for a long moment before replying. I'll go. But only because I want to get this over with. Not because I think it'll help. Clara nodded, knowing that, even reluctantly, he had taken the first step. That night, Clara returned to the family house and wrote in her journal. Today I realized that the distance between Rafael and me isn't just about recent hurts. It's about generations of unspoken silence and unmet expectations. If he's willing to try, even reluctantly, maybe this is the beginning of something new. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Rafael looked at the folder he had taken from the house. Opening it, he found a photo from his childhood. Him and his father, smiling as they fixed a bicycle together. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember that, despite everything, there had been love in that house. Anna's office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Rafael entered hesitantly, clearly uneasy. Clara was already seated, trying to appear calm, though her nervousness was evident in her tightly intertwined fingers. Anna greeted them with a welcoming smile, immediately sensing the tension between them. Thank you both for being here, Anna began, taking her seat in front of the constellation board. Today we're going to explore some of the dynamics within your family. We're not here to judge or assign blame, but to understand what each of you carries. Rafael crossed his arms, muttering, I hope this doesn't take too long. Clara shot him a warning look but kept her focus on Anna. Anna began by placing pieces on the board to represent Rafael, Clara, and their father, forming a triangular arrangement. Let's start by observing how you feel when you look at this setup, Anna said. Clara was the first to speak. It feels like we're all distant, like something has kept us apart. Rafael sighed but answered honestly. To me it feels like I've always been on the outside. Like I was never really part of the same group. Anna nodded, moving Rafael's piece farther away from the others. And how does that make you feel, Clara? Sad, Clara replied, tears starting to form. I feel like there was always space for him, but he never wanted to come closer. Rafael looked at her surprised but said nothing. Anna picked up an extra piece and placed it behind their fathers. This piece represents something that may have remained hidden. Something your father carried that may have shaped how he related to you. Clara studied the arrangement, trying to comprehend. What could that be? He never talked much about his childhood, but he always seemed reserved. Despite his initial reluctance, Rafael began to observe more intently. He was reserved about everything. About feelings, about praise, it always seemed like he was holding something back. Anna moved the hidden piece closer to their fathers. Sometimes the dynamics we inherit come from experiences that are left unspoken. It could be trauma, a loss, or even a belief passed down through generations. Rafael finally broke the silence with a sigh. I remember him talking about how his father, our grandfather, was strict. He said he never felt good enough for him. Maybe he repeated that with us without even realizing it. Clara looked at Rafael, surprised at the vulnerability in his voice. You think he expected too much from you because that's how he grew up? Maybe, Rafael said thoughtfully. But it doesn't change the fact that I always felt like he saw me more as a responsibility than as a son. Anna interjected gently. Sometimes when we carry heavy expectations, we project those same expectations onto others without meaning to. That may have created a cycle of disconnection between you two. Anna moved Clara's piece closer to their fathers. And you, Clara? What was your relationship with him like? Clara thought for a moment before answering. I always felt close to him, but I think he expected me to be the bridge between everyone. When he and Rafael fought, he would look to me, as if I were responsible for keeping everything together. Rafael looked up surprised. I never knew that. Maybe because I never said it, Clara admitted. But now, looking at this, I realize I was always trying to make everything work. And that made me feel like when you pulled away it was somehow my fault. Anna placed another piece on the board, this time representing their grandfather, positioning it behind their fathers. When we look at previous generations, we can begin to understand how patterns of behavior are passed down. How does this make you feel? Rafael spoke first. It feels like my father carried more weight than I ever imagined. Maybe he was so busy trying to deal with what he inherited that he didn't know how to deal with me. Clara nodded, her voice full of emotion. I see how hard he tried, even if he didn't know how. And I see how we repeated those patterns without even realizing it. Anna offered a soft smile. Recognizing this is the first step toward transforming the relationship you have with each other. At the end of the session, Rafael looked at Clara with something that felt like an unspoken apology. I didn't know you felt that way, Clara, he said quietly. I always thought you had it easier, that Dad understood you better. But maybe I was so caught up in my own hurt that I never tried to see what you were going through. Clara wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek. And I never tried to understand what it was like to be you. I just wanted you to stay, but I never asked why you wanted to leave. Rafael sighed, seeming lighter than when the session began. Maybe we still have a chance to fix this. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "Today I saw my brother in a way I never had before. Not as someone distant, but as someone carrying his own pain. Maybe the path to reconciliation isn't about fixing the past, but understanding that love can begin again, even in the middle of hurt." Rafael, back in his apartment, held the photo of him and his father, feeling something different. For the first time, the memories no longer felt like just a burden. The family house, with its walls filled with memories and silence, was becoming a symbol of the distance between Clara and Rafael, but also of a possible reconciliation. Determined not to give up, Clara felt that the house was not just a material inheritance, but a bridge to her brother and the shared history between them. One morning, while organizing old boxes in their father's study, Clara found something she didn't expect: a handwritten letter hidden among dusty books. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to their father. "Rafael, if you ever read this letter, I want you to know that I always saw your strength, even in the moments when you thought you weren't enough. The weight I placed on your shoulders wasn't fair, but it came from the desire to see you become the man I knew you could be. Forgive my silence. I loved you every single moment, even if I never managed to say it in words." Clara felt tears fall as she read those words over and over again. It was a late confession, but a true one. Their father had loved Rafael, but he never knew how to express it. Determined to show her brother what she had found, Clara sent him a brief but meaningful message. "Rafael, I found a letter from Dad. It's for you. You need to read it." Rafael replied hours later, just as skeptical as always. "I don't need more empty words, Clara. They won't change anything." However, the next day, Rafael showed up at the family house. Clara found him standing in the living room, his gaze lost on the walls that had once been full of life. "You came," Clara said, surprised and relieved. "I want to see the letter," Rafael replied, his voice low but firm. Clara handed him the paper carefully. Rafael took it and began to read in silence. As his eyes moved across their father's words, his face hardened, but his hands trembled slightly. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything for a long time. "It doesn't change anything, Clara," he whispered finally. "These are words written too late." "But they're true," Clara responded, moving closer to him. "And even if they came late, they mean something. He loved you, Rafael, even if he never said it out loud." Rafael shook his head, torn between anger and pain. "It's easy to say that now when he's not here anymore. I spent my entire life trying to live up to something I didn't even understand. Do you think I didn't feel that too?" Clara shot back, tears in her eyes. "I was the daughter who had to be perfect, who tried to make up for everything that wasn't right. But that doesn't mean we have to stay trapped in the past." Rafael finally looked at her, as if he were seeing his sister for the first time in years. "I don't know, Clara. I don't know how you rebuild something that's broken. Clara held his hand, squeezing it firmly. One step at a time. We can start here. Not for Dad, but for us. Rafael remained silent, but he didn't pull his hand away. For the first time, it seemed that a small crack was opening in the armor he had built to protect himself. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "Today I realized that rebuilding is hard, especially when the pain runs deep. But every word spoken, every step taken, brings us a little closer." Rafael isn't ready to forgive, but he listened. And maybe sometimes that's how healing begins. Alone in his apartment, Rafael reread their father's letter. For the first time, he allowed himself to cry, letting those words reach parts of his heart he had hidden for so long. Clara and Rafael spent the following days alternating between revisiting memories and trying to decide the fate of the house. Despite the initial reconciliation, the topic remained delicate. For Clara, the house was a piece of their father, their childhood, and everything they had lost. For Rafael, it was a place burdened with expectations and wounds he was still struggling to heal. Silence hung between them, but something had changed. A willingness to keep trying. Clara was in the living room, organizing their father's letters when Rafael walked in, holding a cup of coffee. "Clara, I've been thinking about the house," he began, sitting on the couch. "And what have you decided?" Clara asked, trying to hide her anxiety. Rafael took a deep breath before answering. "I know how much it means to you. And after everything we've seen here, I realize I may have underestimated what it represents." Clara looked at him surprised but said nothing. "I don't want to sell it," he continued. "But I also don't know if I can stay here. Maybe we can use it in a way that honors Dad but also makes it something new. Something ours." Clara smiled, emotional. "Do you really think that?" "Yes," Rafael said. "But I want us to decide this together. No arguments. No resentment." Over the next few days, Clara and Rafael brainstormed ideas. What could they do with a house that preserved its history but was also a practical choice? What if we turned Dad's studio into a workshop space? Clara suggested. He loved building things. "I think he'd be happy if other people could use the space to create." Rafael considered the idea, nodding slowly. "That's a good idea. And the rest of the house? We could keep the bedrooms as they are but use the living room for exhibitions or community gatherings," Clara said enthusiastically. "We can open it for visitors and share Dad's story. Not just what he did, but who he was." Rafael smiled, for the first time truly sharing his sister's excitement. "That feels right. Something he would be proud of." While preparing the house for the changes, Rafael found a notebook hidden in a drawer in the studio. Unlike the others, this one contained personal reflections, almost like a diary. One page caught his attention. "I've always struggled to express what I feel. I was raised to believe that men don't show weakness, but sometimes I think that pushed me away from my children. Clara is my heart, always so full of life. Rafael is my strength, even when he doesn't realize it. I hope they find each other, even if I'm not here to see it." Rafael read the words in silence, feeling a knot in his throat. When he showed the page to Clara, she couldn't hold back her tears. "He knew," she said, her voice breaking. "He knew we needed this. And I think we're starting to find it," Rafael replied with a sad smile. The following week, Clara and Rafael began transforming the house. Clara focused on the studio, cleaning and reorganizing their father's tools, while Rafael handled the practical aspects, such as repairs and financial planning. The process wasn't easy, but the two found something unexpected, a new way to connect. While painting a wall, Rafael commented, "You know, I never thought we'd do something like this together. I always imagined we'd just go our separate ways." "I thought that too," Clara admitted. "But now that we're here, it feels like this is exactly what we needed." When the studio was finished, Clara suggested holding a small ceremony to reopen the house. They invited friends, neighbors, and even some of their father's old acquaintances. That day, as Clara explained the meaning of the space to the guests, Rafael watched from a distance, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: pride. When Clara finished, he approached her and said softly, "You did a great job, Clara. Dad would be so proud of you." Clara smiled, holding her brother's hand. "And of you too, Rafael." He always was. That night, as Rafael drove back to his apartment, he thought about how much his view of the house had changed. It was no longer a burden but a place where he could remember their father without pain. Clara, back at the house, wrote in her journal, "Today I felt like we found something that seemed lost for a long time. It wasn't just about saving the house but about saving each other. Dad left us a gift. The chance to start over. And I think we're finally accepting it." The house had been given a new life. Against all expectations, Clara and Rafael had managed to transform it into something that honored their father's legacy while creating new memories. The renovated studio, filled with old tools and unfinished wooden pieces, was now a vibrant space open to the community. However, despite the progress, the siblings' relationship remained fragile. Their partnership had brought a sense of unity, but it also exposed wounds that at times still ached. On a quiet Saturday morning, Rafael arrived at the house earlier than expected. He found Clara in the studio, organizing supplies, her face focused. "You're always here," he said lightly, though Clara sensed something in his tone. "Someone needs to take care of things," she replied without looking up from the papers. "I handle the finances, Clara. You don't have to do everything alone," Rafael retorted, his defensiveness creeping in. Clara put down the papers and looked at her brother. "I know you're helping, Rafael, but you only show up when it suits you. It still feels like this is something you can walk away from. That's not fair." Rafael's voice rose. "Do you think you're the only one who cares about this house? I'm here, I'm helping, and yet it still feels like I'll never be enough for you." Clara crossed her arms, visibly hurt. "I just wanted to feel like you're really here, Rafael. Not just physically, but in your heart." The room fell silent. Rafael took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make you believe that, Clara," he finally said, softer now. "Maybe I'll never be the brother you wanted me to be." He walked out, leaving Clara alone in the studio. That afternoon, feeling lost, Clara called Anna, her therapist, for guidance. "I feel like we've made so much progress, but now it feels like we're back where we started," Clara admitted. "Every time I try to reach out, Rafael pulls away." "Clara," Anna said gently, "healing often makes us confront the same challenges more than once. But each time we have a chance to respond differently." Clara hesitated. "And how do I do that? How do I show him that we're on the same side?" "Start by listening," Anna suggested. "Ask him how he feels. Don't try to fix or correct what he says. Just let him be seen and heard." The next day, Clara found Rafael sitting in the studio, staring at an unfinished piece of wood their father had once started to carve. "Can I sit with you?" she asked softly. Rafael nodded without looking at her. For a few minutes they sat in silence. Then Clara took a deep breath. "Yesterday I didn't really listen to you, Rafael. I was so focused on making this work that I forgot to ask how you feel about all of this." Rafael looked at her, surprised but still hesitant. "I feel lost, Clara. Sometimes it feels like we're fixing the house, but nothing can fix what's broken between us. And I don't know if I'm ready for that." "I feel the same way," Clara admitted. "But I think if we keep trying, we can build something better. Even if it's just one step at a time." Rafael glanced at the unfinished wood and then back at Clara. "You know what Dad used to say about things like this? That every unfinished piece still has the potential to become something beautiful. Maybe that's what we are, Clara, unfinished but full of potential." Clara smiled through her tears. "I like that. We can start again, Rafael. One step at a time." That afternoon, Rafael proposed something unexpected. What if we finish this piece of Dad's? Not how he would have done it, but in our own way. Something we can leave here in the studio. Clara nodded, her voice full of emotion. I'd love that. Together, they began working on the wooden piece. Rafael focused on cutting and shaping the wood, while Clara polished and added finishing touches. The silence between them felt different this time. Not heavy, but full of collaboration and understanding. Days later, they completed the piece. A small boat delicately carved, with wooden sails and intricate details that reflected both their work. They placed it on a central shelf in the studio, next to a photo of their father. He would have loved this, Clara said softly, touching the boat with affection. Rafael remained silent for a moment, then said, Maybe now I can come here without feeling like I'm stuck in the past. Clara smiled, holding her brother's arm. The past is part of us, Rafael, but it doesn't have to define us. We're building something new now, something Dad would be proud of. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, Today I realize that not all unfinished pieces need to stay that way. Sometimes, all it takes is a little patience and courage to finish what was started. Rafael and I are far from perfect, but we're together. And in the end, maybe that's what truly matters. In his apartment, Rafael looked at a photo of the boat he had taken in the studio. For the first time, the house, once a burden, felt like a symbol of something greater. Reconnection and hope. The studio was nearly ready for its grand reopening. The house, now full of life and purpose, was a reflection of the new relationship Clara and Rafael had worked so hard to build. But the past, even when we believe it has been left behind, sometimes finds a way to return. That's what happened on a quiet morning when an unexpected knock at the door brought a visitor neither sibling anticipated. Clara was finalizing details in the studio when she heard the doorbell. Assuming it was a neighbor or supplier, she opened the door and froze. There stood Andre, an old friend of their father's. Clara hadn't seen him since the funeral. A man with graying hair and a rigid posture. His eyes carried the weight of decades of unspoken truths. Clara, he said, his smile faint but sincere. May I come in? Clara hesitated, a chill running through her. Of course. Please come in. Rafael appeared in the hallway, frowning as soon as he saw the visitor. Andre, what are you doing here? Andre looked between the two siblings before answering. I heard you were restoring the house and reopening the studio. I thought it was time to talk about some things you might want to know. The three of them sat in the living room. Clara and Rafael exchanged wary glances as Andre took in the house with a nostalgic gaze. As you know, your father and I were very close, Andre began, his voice low and steady. But there's a reason he was the way he was. I think it's time you heard the truth. Rafael crossed his arms, skeptical. Why now? Why didn't you say anything before? Because I promised your father I wouldn't, Andre replied. But seeing what you've created here, I think you deserve to know. Clara swallowed hard. What truth? Andre took a deep breath before speaking. Your father grew up in a very difficult home. Your grandfather, the man you know only from photographs, was not a good man. He was strict, controlling, and abusive. He taught your father from a young age that any sign of weakness was unacceptable. That shaped the man he became. The silence in the room was suffocating. Clara felt her chest tighten, while Rafael stared intently at the floor. So he didn't know how to show affection, Clara murmured. He was afraid, Andre continued. Afraid of repeating what he had lived through. He wanted to be different, but the weight of that past was too much. He carried a guilt he couldn't let go of. Rafael finally looked at Andre, his voice strained. Why didn't he tell us? He wanted to protect you, Andre said gently. He thought that by keeping the truth hidden, he was sparing you from carrying the same burden. But sometimes, silence can hurt more than the truth. When Andre left, Clara and Rafael sat together, trying to process what they had just learned. "I don't know what to think," Rafael said, breaking the silence. "I spent my whole life believing Dad thought I wasn't good enough. And now I find out he was just trying to be different." Clara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. It explains so much. The way he closed off, how he avoided talking about the past. He thought he was protecting us. Rafael ran his hands over his face, visibly shaken. "I wish I had known sooner. Maybe I could have understood him better. Maybe we could have been closer." Clara moved closer and placed a hand on her brother's shoulder. "But now we do know. And maybe we can use that to forgive him. To forgive ourselves." Rafael nodded, trying to steady his emotions. "I think what we're doing with this house, it's more important than ever. Maybe this is our way of healing it all." The next morning, Rafael called Clara into the studio. He looked calmer but resolute. "Clara, I've been thinking," he began. "We've turned this place into something beautiful. But I think we can do more. We can tell Dad's story. Not just the good parts, but all of it. Show that he was a man who fought against a difficult past but loved us in the only way he knew how." Clara smiled, moved by his words. "Do you think people will understand that?" "Maybe not everyone," Rafael admitted. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand now. And we can choose to tell the truth." On the day of the reopening, the house was full. Friends, neighbors, and even some of their father's old acquaintances gathered to see the transformed space. Clara arranged family photos on a special wall, with the wooden piece she and Rafael had finished placed at the center, symbolizing their shared effort. Before opening the event, Clara and Rafael addressed the crowd. "This house was the heart of our family," Clara began, her voice steady. "But for a long time it was also a symbol of silence and distance. Today it represents something new. Truth, reconnection, and forgiveness," Rafael added. "Our father wasn't perfect, but he did the best he could with what he knew. And we're here to honor that while creating something of our own. This house is now a place where people can gather, share, and connect, just like we're learning to do." The applause was heartfelt. But the most important feeling was the peace that settled over Clara and Rafael. For the first time, the house felt whole. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "Today I realized that love isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden behind silence, distance, or even pain. But it's there if we look carefully. What we've built here is more than a house. It's a home where the truth can finally exist." In the studio, Rafael sat quietly, looking at the wooden piece they had finished. For the first time, he knew his father would be proud. And at last he was proud of himself too. The reopening of the house had been a success. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers had passed through the space, admiring the photos, the carefully restored details, and most of all, the atmosphere of warmth and welcome that Clara and Rafael had created. That evening, the house was quiet again. Not the heavy, oppressive silence of the past, but something serene, like a deep breath after a long storm. Clara and Rafael sat together in the living room, tired but content. It was the first moment they could truly absorb what they had accomplished. Clara glanced at Rafael, who was staring at the wooden piece they had finished, proudly displayed in the studio through the open door. "Did you think this was possible?" she asked, breaking the silence. Rafael smiled, reflective. "If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have said no. That we'd never be able to fix any of this. But I think the house ended up fixing us." Clara smiled too, wiping away a single tear. "Did you know that Dad loved boats?" "No," Rafael replied, intrigued. "Why?" "When I was little, he used to say that even the smallest, most fragile boat always has a chance to find a new destination. I think that's why he started carving that piece and never finished it. Maybe he knew that one day we would." Rafael nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor as if absorbing the weight of her words. "Then I think he can finally rest." Later that night, Clara found Rafael sitting in the studio, pen and paper in hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, leaning against the door. Rafael didn't look up right away. He kept writing, and when he finished, carefully folding the paper, he replied softly, "I wrote a letter to Dad." Clara moved closer, sitting beside him. "Do you want to read it to me?" Rafael hesitated, then unfolded the paper and began to read. Dad. For so long I carried anger and resentment. I thought you never saw me for who I was, that I would never be good enough for you. But now I understand. I understand that you did the best you could, even if you didn't know how to show it. The house you left us is no longer just a place of difficult memories. It's a place where Clara and I have learned to rebuild what we thought was lost. And finally, I can forgive you, Dad. I can forgive myself too. I hope wherever you are, you can see what we've created here. I hope you know we're grateful for everything you left us, even the hard parts. With love, Rafael. Asterisk. When Rafael finished reading, Clara couldn't hold back her tears. She took his hand and whispered, "He would be so proud of you, Rafael." Rafael smiled, deeply moved, and placed the letter on the shelf beside the wooden boat they had completed together. The next morning, Rafael called Clara into the studio. Sunlight poured in through the window, and Rafael looked lighter than ever. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, "about what we've built here and what comes next." Clara nodded, curious. "What do you have in mind?" "I don't want to pull away again," Rafael admitted. "I want this house to keep being a symbol of what we rebuilt, not just for us but for other people too." Clara smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I was thinking the same thing. This place can be more than a studio or a community space. It can be a place where people come to share their stories, to heal just like we did." "Then let's do it," Rafael said with conviction. "Let's open this place to anyone who needs it. Let's give new meaning to the story we've inherited." That afternoon, Clara and Rafael placed a small plaque at the entrance of the house. It read, "House of New Beginnings, where stories can be told and bonds can be rebuilt." As they looked at the plaque together, Rafael spoke softly, "I think we finally found what Dad wanted for us." "Yes," Clara replied, squeezing her brother's hand. "And we found each other too." That night, Clara wrote the final entry in her journal. Today I realized that the real inheritance Dad left us wasn't the house. It was the chance to start over. For too long we carried silence, but now we've chosen truth. We've chosen love. This house will always be a place of healing, for us and for anyone else who needs it. And Rafael and I know that, even after so much distance, there is always a way back home. Asterisk. In the studio, Rafael sat at the work table and began carving a new piece. For the first time, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply creating. The house at last was complete. With the House of New Beginnings open to the public, Clara and Rafael not only preserved their father's memory, but discovered a greater purpose. What began as a struggle had transformed into a journey of healing, reconciliation, and love. And in the silence now filled with meaning, the walls of the house told a new story. The story of two siblings who chose to find each other again.